Hey, welcome to a tutorial on how to paint trees and make it have some distance. I'm painting a full sheet of watercolor here, watercolor paper. It's 22 by 30 inches, which for the little paintmobile that I travel around in is actually bigger than my table. So I'm painting standing up on this little table easel here. But there's nothing more fun than having this acreage of paper there in front of you to create on. So I'm just having a blast with this. I was traveling with my little brother through McMinnville, Oregon, in the valley, and came across this beautiful old farmhouse just sitting in a field of Queen's Anne lace and shrubs with some beautiful trees, deciduous and evergreens. And it just took my breath away. I snapped the photo and I said, "Look at this." And we both oohed and awed over it. So I couldn't wait to paint it. I put out a little sketch here. Very simple house in the midground, some trees and some foliage in the foreground. But it's the trees in the background that we're going to focus on in this tutorial here. And so I'm going to start out mixing some of my favorite color, Jene Dusty Green. It's a mix of Halloween Orange and Andrews Turquoise. And these are American Journey paints that you can get from Cheap Joe's. But orange and turquoise make the most beautiful olivey green. And just by adding little splashes of ultramarine or cobalt, or even you can push it with reds, you can change that green to be a desert green, high desert green. You could make it fall foliage in Utah or the East Coast. I mean, it's just a beautiful green base to start out with. Because it's so heavily pigmented, it almost goes 3D as it dries, and it just has a lot of magic in it. You can buy Jene Dusty Green already mixed from American Journey. It's a lovely color. I highly recommend it. Anyway, the cardinal rule for painting foliage is always leave holes for the birds to fly through. So I'm going to start out painting this background here by making it a solid toward the base, behind the house and right in the backyard here. So there won't be any holes at the bottom. And so you can see I'm just filling that in. And then as I bring the trees higher up, I'm going to start to leave holes in it so the birds can fly through, but mostly it's just so you can see the sky, and it just gives a lot of distance. The fact that you can't see through the bottom, the horizon line, and you can see through the tops of the trees gives it that perspective, and it just lets your spirit, soak right into the painting. Notice also, people are always saying, I want to paint looser. Here is the home run tip on how to do that. Notice how I'm holding my brush. And I want to talk a little bit about the brush that I'm using too. But, I'm holding it almost halfway up, which just lets it be so much more expressive. And I'm using a Chinese calligraphy brush. They're by Yu Ming, my friend Yu Ming, out of the Seattle area. Phenomenal brush, also available at Cheap Joe's. And this is the large size. And notice there also I took a little water and just dipped my fingers in my water container and just kind of flicked it at the painting a little bit, just to break it up and to give it a little bit of movement. But, here's where this brush really has its strength. I've got the ends all splayed out, and I'm just almost punishing it, but it can take it. This is where this brush really excels, is just being so expressive with foliage and textures. So I'm literally just, pushing it into the paper, letting the tips move out in all different directions, letting the paint do what it does with its granulation and its gravitas, and adding some treetops. I'll take the brush and start doing some horizontal strokes to add some tree trunks and some light branches and things, and not overdoing it too much. I don't want any of this foliage to come forward. This is all background work here, and the farther back and the less detail you put into it, the more it's just going to recede and be that that curtain behind the stage that the actors, our focal point of the house, is going to be standing on. Now, this is a core technique that I've been working on for years, and it's funny because I think we all have that one brush that does the thing that we need it to do. And so I have this smaller Chinese calligraphy brush, also by Yuming, and I'm mixing some ultramarine blue and some burnt sienna for a dark, and then some water. I'm dipping it in water to dilute it down. But what this brush does is it lets me just cast these little droplets of darks, these little shadows into the foliage. But I can control it so much. I can literally throw this paint like into the tightest little places with so much control. It's just like this brush does this one thing, and that's why I always keep it around. And I love this brush just for this one purpose, just to be able to throw those little darks in there where I need them to. And the paint's a little bit wet, so it'll move around a tiny bit, but you kind of have a little bit of a timing thing there, because if it's too wet, it'll just soak in and it'll all turn into a big kind of dark fuzz. And what I'm doing here now is, once I've cast those darks in, I'm taking the larger brush and I'm just kind of softening the edges out a little bit. But the whole point of this is to add some shadows to that foliage. And man, talk about giving it depth. And while the bristles of the brush are all splayed out and individualized, I'm kind of using it there to, again, do some branches and put some texture into the top of the trees. But notice how it's darker toward the horizon line, which is where your shadows are going to be thickest. And again, giving it more distance and more dimension. And you'll see me also go around the house as I add more of these darks and kind of cutting around closer. I don't want the house to look like it was cut out and pasted on there. So in some places I will let the darks overrun the house. But that's just to bring the two together. You never want to paint your backgrounds and then your foregrounds and your midgrounds, because it looks like it's layered almost. You want to kind of overlap things when you can and bleed them into one another to kind of daisy chain them a little bit. And that brings everything into a cohesive plane. A little bit of detail work here with the brush again. Just adding little subtle things, little hints of what might be limbs, just for interest. Now I'm going to do this quite a bit because this is where it starts to get fun, and it's almost like sculpting at this point. But see how I was able to just drop those darks right into the corner of that house there? And it really looks like I'm just throwing a lot of paint around, but believe it or not, and I didn't do this the first time I tried it, believe me. I went through a few paintings before I was able to get this paint to go where I wanted it to go. But yeah, being able to just cast those darks and reinforce them, it will give a lot of dimension. It'll give a lot of weight to the horizon line. And that lets the eye travel up and into the sky and into the lighter areas. Lots more shadows here. And eventually I'll stop refining the edges as much and let some of those dark spots really settle in. In other words, if I threw a dark circle of paint down, I might soften the top of the circle, but let the bottom of the circle stay solid so that it gives a more weighted shadow. And here's another opportunity to bring out some more foliage and to reinforce those darks. You can see now the bottoms of the trees are really starting to have some values. In the front of this bush, I wanted it to stand out a little bit, so by throwing casting a little bit of the dark into the front of that bush there, it really made it pop out. Now, there are some bushes in the foreground too, and I want to give them some shadows. And never choking the brush up, never holding it like a pencil, always holding it like a conductor, or I call it the Harry Potter method. I'm typically holding my brush like a magic wand, which it really is if you think about it. Cutting down into the backyard there a little. I'm going to take some horizontal swipes at that to make it look like there's a lawn back there. Cutting around the outbuildings. I'm also going to pick up some different colors. I'll work with, there's a cerulean blue that'll give a nice granular effect to some of the foliage. And eventually, and I won't show it in this part of the video, but you'll see it in the finished painting, I do this same casting with some orange and some periwinkle just to give some different colors into the trees. And I will be adding some darker, much darker evergreens into the foreground, and then a couple will go into the background, and you'll see that in a little bit. Every single day I wake up, the first thing I think about is, I get to paint today. It is such a joy. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be able to spend time with you, sharing my painting skills. I'm very grateful to Cheap Joe's for the support over the years and sponsoring this video and for sponsoring me. I'm very, very grateful for the opportunity to be an artist. I love to paint. It really is like flying. What a wonderful brush this is. Look at the tip on this. It's almost like pencil sharp now, and I'm using that sharp tip of that brush to edge in and to do just a little bit more detail and to cut around the house. But it can do so much. It can be have a very fine point. You can splay it out, as you saw earlier, to do the foliage. It holds lots of water. It's really a very fine instrument. I could paint with any brushes my heart desires, and I choose the calligraphy brushes. All right, if you have any questions, artaward.com, hit me up, or contact those good people at Cheap Joe's. I'm sure they'd be happy to answer any questions. And I just wish you all happy painting.